This story begins with the introduction of the main character, whose name is Ivon Tiisha. She is the youngest sword in the Empire of Albrahit. The girl is the youngest in the Tiisha dynasty, which includes all the most famous knights of the state. That is how she was spoken of as a child. On the way in the carriage, our heroine reflected on the fact that she again had to go to the castle to Ernest. The boy is the second prince in the Albrahite Empire and has been her closest friend since early childhood. She had heard a lot about how their future with him was predetermined. Tiny didn't know what that future meant, but sometimes her parents made her go out with Ernest. Tiny remembered her older sisters asking her to stay away from Prince Theodore under no circumstances. All the inhabitants of the empire had heard about this young man and said that the guy mindlessly kills people. All living creatures were just guinea pigs for him to torture. There were even rumors that he was taking blood baths. People were sure that all the troubles came from his hair color, which was black like tar. Everyone in the people tried to avoid black color because for them it symbolized the ancient evil which once almost destroyed the whole world. Of course, it was just rumors and legends, but when a crown prince with this hair color was born in the emperor's family, everyone got very nervous. Ivon put all her fearful thoughts aside and thought about the fact that it was unlikely that she would ever meet him in person. She was immediately met by Ernest, who hugged her and told her he missed her. Then the boy grabbed her hand and began to drag her somewhere, saying that today his mother had arranged a gala reception. Our heroine asked him to wait a bit as she needed to say hello to everyone first. Ernest said that it was no big deal. It can be done later since Mom is busy at the moment anyway. The maids discussed that it all looked very nice. The girl thought that even though she and the prince were the same age, she felt like an older sister next to him. Then the boy began to offer to play the mother's daughter, but our heroine did not want to play this game and suggested that it would be better to let it be hide and seek. After thinking a little, the boy exclaimed that it was fine and he would be the first to drive. Hiding in a tree, the girl watched the boy keeping score and decided that he would not find her there. She was so good in the tree that it seemed she was about to fall into a deep sleep. Suddenly, our heroine began to hear some noise and crunching of branches near her. It was a young man whom she saw for the first time and did not understand who he was. From surprise, she even lost the power of speech. When he greeted her, the girl noted that he was incredibly handsome and had a beautiful voice. Noticing that Ivon was embarrassed, the young man asked why she was blushing. The girl said that it was simply the height of summer and she was hot. The stranger then asked what she had climbed the tree for. The little girl explained that she was just playing hide and seek with a friend and clarified why he had climbed up there. When the boy said he was looking for treasure, the little girl exclaimed that she knew the game, but if he wanted to, they could talk some more. During the conversation, the time passed just unnoticed, and it was already beginning to get dark. Our heroine exclaimed in surprise that it was already so late. Then she said that she had to go. She did not think that she would sit in the tree all day. Taking her hand, the boy asked if they could meet again. Tiisha replied that, of course, let him not worry about that. She then said goodbye and told him that she had to go now. After the girl left, the young boy remarked that she was quite lovely and asked the bound men who were hanging head down from the tree if they thought she was just lovely. A while later, the boy reflected on the fact that this was the first time he had ever seen such a girl. She looked like a doll. Then a subordinate came up to him and said that, at his request, he had figured out all the spies in the palace. It seems they were indeed sent by the Empress. Placing his foot on the head of a slain enemy, the lad said to send those corpses to her. The young boy replied that the palace was quite noisy right now, as the guest of the first prince was missing. But the boy did not pay any attention to his words at all and said that he seemed to have fallen in love after all. Sometime later, when Ivon appeared, Ernest rushed to embrace her and asked where she'd been all this time, for he could not find her and thought she was offended. The girl apologized and said that she had just fallen asleep in the tree and did not notice how time had passed. Our heroine noted that he was just a child, and that stranger from the tree looked very mature, but unfortunately she did not even ask his name. The next day, the older sisters noticed that something was wrong with Ivon, and the younger one looked thoughtful. They didn't know what was going on with her, but she hadn't been herself since her visit to the prince. Without eating anything, the girl said that everything was delicious and she had to go. The little girl couldn't stop thinking about that guy. She kept remembering his golden-colored eyes, shining in the rays of the setting sun, and a quiet, soft voice, which seemed to caress her aloud. All she could ponder was whether they could meet again. She didn't know what was happening to her, for the thought of him made it hard to breathe. Her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of her grandmother, whose name was Grace Winkle. The woman asked if Ivon would go back to training. and then added that it would be better for her granddaughter to do embroidery or dress up instead of waving the iron stick in vain. Why would a girl even bother practicing martial arts in the first place? She could have gone and visited the prince instead, after all. A lady who would soon become his consort shouldn't be doing such a thing. The little girl replied that she was wrong, for the Tiisha clan is famous for its skillful warriors. They are the blade of the empire, so everyone is obliged to know how to handle weapons. Our heroine is also a member of this dynasty, so she is not going to lower her sword. Grandma replied that she has a stubborn character, but as long as she answers like that, then everything is fine. It dawned on the little girl that her grandmother was just worried about her, as she is a good person, but generally likes to be quiet. Then the woman noted that it seems that when she went to the palace, something happened. Then she asked if it was not connected with the second prince. The girl replied that of course not, she just thinks a lot lately and everything is fine. The grandmother said that in that case, maybe she could go to the prince again and get some air. That way they could get closer. After a while, Ivon was there again and noted that Grace didn't like her training after all. She also wondered what she had said to the servants, that they were now standing around them like watchdogs. She was very tired of it all. But the thought of that young man never left her. She wanted to see him again. She decided to ask Ernest if by any chance he had seen a boy a little taller than her with black hair and golden eyes, who was quite handsome. The boy replied that he had not. Our heroine thought of the fact that he could hardly remember all his servants. Then one of the subordinates came up to the boy and said that classes should begin soon. The little girl exclaimed that it was all right, let him go, and she would take a walk in the garden in the meantime. The boy tearfully said what would happen if she disappeared again, because it was dangerous to be alone. Ivon replied that they were in the palace, so nothing could happen to her. Then Ernest made her promise not to go near the first prince's chambers. Our heroine completely forgot what kind of place the imperial palace is and that she should beware of Theodore. After a while, she saw the same young man lying unconscious on the ground and ran up to him. As our heroine strolled along, Ernest's servants followed her everywhere. She thought to herself that it was really that necessary. She couldn't wait to get home. Ivon thought she would never get to meet the boy again, as she suddenly saw that he was lying unconscious on the ground. The boy grabbed her hand and pulled her close to him, then said hello and that she had kept her promise. The little girl was confused at first, but then sharply pushed him away from her. She did not understand what was happening to her, but it seemed that her heart was about to jump out of her chest. Noticing that the boy coughed, the girl apologized and asked if it hurt. The boy replied that everything was fine, but he just had a slight cold, then asked how she was doing. The little girl exclaimed that actually, it is now not to the duty courtesies. She thought to herself that he looked sick and seemed to be shivering. Perhaps he had fainted because of his illness. Then our heroine took his hand and exclaimed that she wanted to go to the palace. She thought to herself that it was necessary to find Ernest and ask him to call the doctor. But suddenly the young man stopped her and said that he did not like to be there. Our heroine noted that he was trembling like an autumn leaf. Then the young man added that it was better to go to the palace of the first prince. Ivon immediately remembered the words of her older sisters, that she should never be seen by Prince Theodore. And also how Ernest had asked her to promise not to go near the first prince. Noticing that the girl hesitated, the boy decided to clarify whether she minded. But a little thinking, our heroine replied that they will go where he wants. When the maids saw who approached our heroine, they had an expression of genuine horror on their faces. Ignoring this, Ivon exclaimed that they were just in time. She would escort this boy to the first prince's chambers. Let them warn Ernest, for he would think she had disappeared again. The maids wanted to object, but from the expression on the boy's face, they realized that they had better not, or it would end very badly. Then he put his arm around Ivon and said that they should go as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the crown prince was bored in class and thought about how he already wanted to go back to his guest. Suddenly a maid came running into the room and said that there was trouble. At this time, our heroine brought the boy to the palace and asked which room was his. On the way, the girl noted that this castle is no different from the main castle, but for some reason, then there were no servants there at all. Then she asked the boy if he worked there and if he had met the first prince. The young man cautiously asked why she was interested in this. Ivon replied that she was just curious. Everyone around her tells her to beware of him and claims that he brings only misfortune. If the prince is really such a bad man, she could ask to have him transferred to work somewhere else. Maybe he is sick precisely because the prince is overworking him. The young boy immediately started to say that he is not that terrible. The girl immediately replied that this was good to hear and that all these rumors were false. Not for nothing, she thought that people around her exaggerate everything too much. Then she decided to ask what his name was because they never met. But the guy did not have time to answer anything because Ernest appeared, who loudly shouted the name of our heroine. Then, with tears in his eyes, he began to beg to return Ivon to him and called the young man Brother Theodore. It dawned on the girl that he was the first prince, then questioned him if that was the case just to make sure. Theodore exclaimed that, "Is it so important?" but afterwards confirmed her words and said that his name was Theodore Rioni Albrecht. Our heroine looked at him in confusion and remembered the words about his hair being as black as night. Is he really so cruel? Because it does not seem so from the outside. Noticing that the girl was confused, the young man asked if she was now afraid of him too. The young man began to reach out his hand to touch her, but Ernest appeared sharply between them, who shouted one word, "No." He then abruptly grabbed Yvonne's hand and began to drag her behind him to get her away from that place as quickly as possible. Theodore, meanwhile, was very disappointed that he didn't get to keep his secret, and it annoyed him a lot. When the prince once again asked if our heroine was all right, she irritably replied that she had already told him 100 times that Theodore was just not feeling well, and she had decided to help him. When he said that, if all of a sudden his relative hurt her or told her to keep quiet, just let him tell her about it. Ivon lost her temper and screamed that this was absolutely not the case, after which she stood up for him to examine her and make sure she was unharmed. A servant appeared in the room and informed the gentleman that it was getting late and he should not linger in the young lady's bedroom, so he would escort him to his chambers. At last the subordinate told the girl that he was very glad that she was absolutely unhurt. Our heroine did not understand what was happening and why they all acted as if she had been in the mouth of a demon. The boy did not do her absolutely nothing bad. Why does everyone around her say only bad things about him? In her opinion, he's much nicer than most people. He has a warm, wonderful smile. She would really like to meet him again. Meanwhile, Theodore was also looking out the window and had exactly the same thoughts in his head as our heroine. He too wanted to see her again, as soon as possible. Sometime later, watching Ernest's strange actions, Ivon asked what he was doing in general. He replied that he could not reveal his identity. The girl asked him if it was a new game. The boy indignantly replied that it wasn't, because who knows when Theodore will show up again and he has to protect her. When Ivon whispered that he didn't have to. The boy indignantly interrogated what she had just said. The girl decided not to develop the topic and reminded him that it was already time to go to class, because the teachers were probably waiting for him. When the guy said that he had a free day and could do whatever he wanted, our heroine thought that he was a liar and let him do as he knows. Noticing that the girl was looking for something for a long time, the boy asked what she was interested in. Ivon replied that she wanted to read something about the imperial palace. The prince pointed to one of the shelves and said that the most recent editions were there. When the little girl found what she wanted, the boy asked why she wanted that particular book. Ivon, meanwhile, thought she might find what she was interested in, namely why the first prince would not leave the palace. But she said out loud that she was just curious. Ernest thought that her friend must have fallen in love with her brave knight if she was interested in history, then she must be ready to be his bride. Then he took her hands and told her not to worry because he will try to become a good emperor and husband. After these words, our heroine became gloomy and cried out, "What kind of husband, and in general, what is he talking about?" It was the first time she heard that she should marry him. After all, in her opinion, people should marry if they have mutual feelings for each other. After these words, our heroine quickly ran away from the library. The prince immediately went after her, but she seemed to disappear in a flash. It turned out that Theodore dragged her outside and covered her mouth with his hand to prevent her from screaming. Afterwards, he apologized and said that he couldn't resist and couldn't wait any longer, so he came to see her. Meanwhile, Ernest was running around the library looking for our heroine, but she seemed to have fallen through the ground, and he did not know where to look for her next. Suddenly, a teacher appeared behind him and said that he had finally found him. Then he dragged him by the hand behind him, saying that today they have a very difficult topic, so there is a lot of work to do. In the meantime, our heroine and Theodore noted that they had left and could no longer hide. Then they turned to each other at the same time, and their faces were at a very close distance. It turned out to be a very awkward moment, after which they moved away from each other and began to apologize. The young man then clarified that he was really sorry and asked if she felt uncomfortable around him. After that, he apologized for hiding the truth about himself. She herself is well aware that people are afraid of his black hair, so they try to stay away. He would really not like it if the girl started to avoid him. Our heroine interrupted him and said that she does not believe in these silly rumors because the way she saw him, very different from the description of other people, but frankly, she really is a little uncomfortable. It was because she had mentioned those stories and told him all the stupid things she had heard about, so now she was ashamed. Afterwards, she apologized and asked if they could make up. The young man replied that, of course. The girl said that she missed him very much. At this time, the boy thought that it seems that for the first time in his life really happy, because meeting her turned his life upside down. Sometime later, the girl dressed up in a beautiful lavender-colored dress and asked Ernest if it suited her, or if it would be better to wear a different piece of jewelry on her hair, but the boy replied that it was fine. Then he asked her why she dressed up like that every day, and exactly at the time when he is in class with the teacher. The girl answered that it was because she was just bored alone in the palace. After that, she exclaimed that it was already a long time, and it was time to go for a walk, and he had a good time studying. That very day, they promised each other that they would meet at the same place every day at 2 o'clock. It was their secret. Climbing the tree, our heroine saw that the young man had already come, but she thought she would have time to come first for once. The young man replied that it was all right, as he had no time to get bored, after which he told her that she looked beautiful. Ivon blushed and replied that it seemed to be business as usual, but the boy objected that she was prettier than everyone around her. The little girl thought to herself that she had asked him not to embarrass her so much. Earlier trips to the palace had been a torture, but now every day during conversations with Theodore, she did not notice how time flew by. During another conversation, our heroine asked him how he managed to lighten his hair. The boy answered that with the help of magic. His father did not like them, and he asked Ferdinand to create an illusion. The little girl wanted to ask him about many things, but she felt that such topics would only upset him. So she exclaimed that she liked everything very much, and his hair looked like the night sky. The guy objected that not long ago she also repeated these silly rumors. Our heroine replied that after seeing him in person, she completely changed her opinion. Paying attention to her hands, Theodore said that her palms didn't look like she belonged to a noble family. Our heroine replied that because of training with a sword, she has a lot of calluses and it does not look good. But the young man kissed her hand and said that he could see at once how hard she was working for her family and nothing could be more wonderful. Then he saw the scar and noted that it was the mark of sword magic and only knights and from the Tiisha clan are capable of such a thing. Noticing that the young man began to guess something, our heroine said that she wanted to tell him something, namely her story. Recently there was a man who missed his dead wife very much. Day after day he poured alcohol into his grief. In his unconsciousness, he mistook another woman for his wife and spent the night with her. As a result of this mistake, a child was born and it was our heroine. She and her mother lived very poorly. The woman was her only relative. However, because of her serious illness, she practically did not get out of bed. Ivon wanted to help her, but there was nothing she could do. One day, creditors broke in and extorted money from her mother, which had to be repaid. The woman said that she would soon be cured and then she could pay everything back. But the men said that if she didn't pay back the debt, they would take her daughter away. This made the little girl very angry, and she threw a fork as hard as she could in the direction of that man to keep him from touching her mom. At breakneck speed, it slammed into the wall a short distance from the creditor's face. Realizing that it was sword magic, the young people rushed to duck. The girl didn't understand how this had happened and looked at her mother in confusion. The next day, she brought her to Mr. Oswald and told him that there was no doubt that she was his daughter. The woman had personally seen the girl use sword magic. The young man irritatedly shouted what she was even talking about, but his father told him to be quiet. Then he came closer to the little girl and said that there was no doubt that she had the blood of the Tiisha family in her. The woman asked what about the money. The man said it was in the next room and she could live without worry for a while. Then the woman left. Sobbing, our heroine looked after her, but the man stroked her head and said that now they were her new family, and her name would be Ivon Tiisha. And she could call him her grandfather. So from a little girl, Eve became Ivon Tiisha, and her life changed a lot. She got a lot of relatives, she started to learn martial arts and memorize all the rules of etiquette. And most importantly, she found a real home and a loving family, but life cannot consist of only joyful moments. When her father began to long for his wife, he denied his daughter's existence. He's the reason she has this mark. Did Theodore know that the scars caused by the magic of the sword can only be removed by holy power? When the girl noticed that Theodore's expression had changed, she said that the story was too dark, but she would tell him how it ended. When her grandfather found out about it, he yelled at her father for using his power against someone much weaker than him. After all, it was a disgrace to their dynasty and kicked the young man out of the house. The young man looked at her silently with sadness in his eyes. Ivon asked him not to look at her with such a sad look. Then she rushed to hug him, and thought to herself that he spoke of his troubles with a smile on his face, but was so much concerned about her wounds. She remembered that she had read that there were terrible rumors about the black-haired prince. When his mother, Empress Hermelinda, died, he was an outcast by his own house. She and he were very much alike, and her heart ached at the thought of him going through such a thing. Then our heroine exclaimed if he would like to come and visit her sometime. Of course they are a little noisy, but her grandparents and her older brothers and sisters are wonderful people. She would really like to introduce him to them. The young man replied that of course he would agree and thanked her for the invitation. The girl returned to the palace when it was already dark and noted that she was very late, but next to Theodore she does not notice how time flies. On the way, she met Lady Empress Margaret, who was Ernest's mother, and exclaimed that she should have greeted her earlier, then asked what she was doing there. The woman explained that her son had told her that the girl was out late every day, so she was worried that Ivon would get lost in the dark. Afterward, she whispered that she also wanted to remind her where her place was. The girl didn't understand what she meant. But the Empress immediately said she had to go and added, "See you, Miss Ivon Tyrant." On the way, the woman thought about the fact that even though she was Tiisha, but still illegitimate and immediately visible dirty blood, because of her, her family might side with the first prince. When the Empress entered one of the rooms, she saw a dead boy and Theodore with a sword in his hands, after which she asked what was even going on. The guy answered that he noticed a spy in the tree during the day who was watching them and decided to deal with him. And she'd better stop following him, and sending assassins was completely pointless. The one he wanted to make his own appeared. Simply put, it's a declaration of war and the throne will go to him anyway. Meanwhile, a mercenary who came from nowhere suddenly attacked Ernest. Ivon came to his defense and beat him on the head with a stick. Then she wondered what he was doing in the palace. Hearing the noise, the servants immediately came running into the room and started asking if they were all right and if they were hurt. When the girl replied that she was fine, the man offered to take her to a safe place. Remembering the words of the Empress that Ivon should know her place, our heroine began to worry about Theodore and wondered if he was all right. It was urgent to go check it out, so she quickly ran away with the words that she would be back soon. The little girl ran down the corridor, praying that Theo was alive, as suddenly a murderer appeared behind her back. But suddenly Theodore materialized beside him and immediately disarmed the attacker. The little girl worriedly asked if he was all right and if he was hurt, because there were assassins roaming the palace. The girl noticed that there was blood on her hands after touching the boy, but he immediately said that he was unharmed and that the blood was not his. She was immediately reminded of the stories about him mindlessly killing people, and every day is filled with the smell of blood. A living person is just a victim for him to torture, and he takes blood baths. The little girl didn't realize why she remembered all this abruptly. The reflection was interrupted by the voice of a young man who asked if he frightened her. When our heroine answered that no, the young man came up and hugged her tightly. Then he apologized and said that he could not accept her invitation to visit her yet, but he promised that he would come for her someday. Let him just wait. Time ran like a mountain river. The events of that night were in the past. Since our heroine returned home, several months had passed and a cold, harsh winter had come. She didn't remember the day well, and it seemed to her that it was just yesterday that Theodore was embracing her. But suddenly she woke up in the snowy estate of the Tiisha dynasty. In letters, she tried to ask the young man what had happened, but she never received any answer. The atmosphere of the house had also changed a lot, and everyone was in great tension. The grandfather was clutching his head and exclaiming that why had this fallen on their fate? A ferocious storm outside the window foretold trouble. Before the end of winter, Turnesius's family was involved in a conspiracy and was wiped off the face of the earth. 10 years later, at Ferdinand Manor, a young man asked Eve if he would be idle much longer. When the lad resented him for being too relaxed, the other replied that he had heard that he was actually of noble lineage. The girl was pleased that outwardly she was quite indistinguishable from the lad. Now her name was Eve Rovlin, and she was 20 years old. That very day, the whole estate was enveloped in fire. The girl shouted to her brother Richard to let her go, for she could also fight. But the bloody, wounded brother sat down on one knee in front of her and told her that she had to run away immediately. He and Grandpa and everyone else can't get away, and she can still save herself. She is their last hope, and when the time comes, let the little sister wash the shame from their family. Nightmares about that terrible day tormented our heroine almost every day. Then, from the terrible fire, she was rescued by none other than the second Prince Ernest. The girl was hysterical, and she screamed that absolutely all her relatives were dead. The boy hugged her tightly and apologized, saying that he had promised his mother that he would only save her. Thus, she became part of the Ferdinand family, who were related to Ernest. Richard, who was the elder brother of the Empress, said he knew who she was. The girl is the youngest swordswoman of the Empire and the last of the Tiisha family. Now she must forget her past name. At the moment, she is an orphan he picked up on the streets and took into his home. She better remember well who she owes her life to. As he held her hand, he felt the energy of Reobrante's holy power. Richard couldn't believe it, for she was to disappear from the face of the earth with the death of the last patriarch of the Tiisha family. He would put a curse on her, and if anyone recognized her and tried to call her by her real name, they would not escape death. That was how her life in hell began. The irritated voice of some girl called our heroine by her new name. It was Miss Katrina who asked why he pretended not to hear her. The girl apologized and said she was just thinking. The aristocrat objected that she was totally unconcerned about these excuses. Katrina Ferdinand was a distant relative adopted by the dynasty. She was supposed to be the consort of the next ruler. When the girl was brought into this family, she reminded the Lord that he should give her a gift in honor of her adoption. The man asked if she had chosen anything. The girl said yes, and pointing to Eve, said she wanted that boy. She made our heroine's life even more unbearable. Slapping her, the girl said she never liked him. The boy acts like an aristocrat and always looks down on her. But in reality, the guy is just an ordinary slave and a simple apprentice to a knight. She could cut his life short right this very second, but as the future empress, will show mercy and help him remember where he belongs. Suddenly the voice of Benjamin Ferdinand, who was the current head of the family and Rudolph's son, came out and menacingly asked what Catherine was doing. The maiden replied that she had simply decided to teach him wisdom. The man asked if anyone had asked her to do so. Katrina replied that Mr. Rudolph had given him to her. The young man is her property, so she can do whatever she wants with him. If the boy can pay her price, she promises not to touch him. Benjamin replied that she doesn't have time for that now. She needs to prepare for the arrival of the guests. Emperor Theodore will pay them a visit. Hearing this name, our heroine was very upset because she missed him madly all this time. The girl immediately replied that she liked such news and added that she hoped he would not forget about their agreement, after which she said goodbye and left. Paying attention to the beaten face of our heroine, the man worriedly asked if she was all right, but the girl did not answer anything and just looked at one point with a blank stare. In her mind were only Theodore's words that he promised that one day he would come for her, and it seemed that at last that time had come. Some time later, the man treated our heroine a little and said that, fortunately, the scars should not remain, then added that he would give a medicine to be applied periodically. The girl asked Benjamin what kind of deal he had made with Katrina. If it had anything to do with her, there was no need, for he had already done so much for her. The man held her tightly against him and told her it was okay. There was no need to worry. All that is needed is a little patience, and he will rid her of Katrina. He had one request, have her reveal her real name. They met 10 years ago on a cold winter's day. While walking, the boy suddenly smelled blood. That came from a small child sitting all alone on the cold ground. Her pure, bright image didn't mesh at all with the smell of death. It was fate. The young man exclaimed that a little girl like her had absolutely no place there. Let her go back home. But suddenly the babe began to cry bitterly and repeat the names of her dead relatives. The boy was very confused and said that he did not want to offend her. Then he introduced himself as Benjamin and asked her what her name was. She answered that it was Eve Rovlin, in a voice trembling with tears. The young man realized that she was not telling the truth, but his heart fluttered. Soon he learned the whole truth of what had happened to her. The boy accidentally overheard the Empress saying that it was all for the best because knowing all this, they would not be able to protect him. It was only to their advantage that the Emperor was in such a state, and they should not forget this girl from the Tiisha clan because they could use her. The boy noted that it seems that this family had died in a fire recently. The girl was left all alone, without a home or family, and didn't know where to go. It was the first time he had ever done anything for another person. Benjamin brought her food, nursed her wounds, sang lullabies to relieve her nightmares, and held her hand. After all this, he fell in love with her. The young man got rid of those knights who mocked her, and also killed her father and Empress Margaret, who considered her their possession. Thus the young man became the patriarch of the Ferdinand family. It was not his purpose to help Prince Theodore ascend the throne, but what happened happened. The main thing was that he did his best to protect Eve Ravlin. After a while, Benjamin approached Katrina and told her that she had hurt Eve again. The damsel replied that he might not thank her, for it was the wound that had allowed him to spend some time with him. After all, he liked this boy and would have him when she became empress, for they had made a bargain. Every time our heroine felt uneasy, her feet themselves carried her to that tree where she and Theodore, in the distant past, had spent a great deal of time. Eve wondered if he remembered her. Even if he did, however, she was still bound hand and foot. After all, if anyone called her by her real name, they would die, and all because of that terrible curse. It didn't matter if she revealed herself or if someone recognized her. She didn't want to see anyone die again. Still, every time she saw Theodore, she was afraid she wouldn't be able to hold back. Suddenly, the branch on which she was leaning began to break, and the girl flew down, but the young man managed to pick her up in his arms. The girl was very afraid to hear her name from the lips of the young man. Meanwhile, the servants were looking for the master and did not understand where he had gone. Looking into his eyes, our heroine noted that it was definitely him, Theodore, whom she had once known. It seemed that the young man immediately recognized her and wanted to say her name, but our heroine quickly covered his mouth with her hand. Rudolph's spell had two conditions. The first was that the man must not recognize Ivon Tyrant in her, and the second was that no one must call her by her real name. Perhaps Theodore would be safe if she simply prevented him from saying her name. Just when Eve thought of running away quickly, the young man flipped her onto her back and said that this knight was in good shape. He liked it a lot. After which he clarified what his name was. The girl was upset that he still did not remember her. And then it dawned on her that at the moment she looked like a guy and he could not recognize her as Ivon. Then she apologized and introduced herself as Eve Ravlin. She thought to herself that it was a good thing he hadn't remembered, but she still couldn't help but be upset. Then she apologized again to His Majesty for being rude. The guy asked in surprise how she knew who he was. Our heroine thought to herself that she could forget him, but she said aloud that his brooch had the coat of arms of the imperial family. Eve heard that Emperor Theodore is famous for his extraordinary beauty. The young man said that he had one request for Sir Eve. He is very curious about where he lives and have him give him a tour. Then he won't tell anyone that the young man knocked the emperor down. Eve was confused at first, but afterwards she agreed. There was no other choice anyway. When the girl showed the training ground, she noted that it was strange that there was no one there at the time appointed for training and where everyone had gone. The correct answer was that everyone was looking for the emperor. After that, she suggested to go to the dormitory in order to consider it. The girl noted to herself that, having grown up, Theodore became even more beautiful than he was. When the young man asked why Eve was looking at him like that, she said that she was just curious as to why he was doing all this. The young man replied that it was simply the emperor's duty to check on his troops and know what was going on with them. To herself, our heroine noted that he had become a very good ruler, and she was not even a real knight. They weren't supposed to meet again. Seeing the room where the new acquaintance lived, the young man noted that it was small, with dilapidated walls and completely worthless. Is this really all that the Ferdinand family can give? Our heroine replied that she is only an apprentice, so this is more than enough. Benjamin wanted to promote her, but she decided not to stand out even more. Taking her hand, the young man noted that he could not believe it, and it seems that the local knights are completely blind. The girl did not understand why he kissed her hand. After all, she looks like a guy. Suddenly, the emperor said he was very glad she hadn't changed and hugged her tightly, adding that he knew she was alive. He then told Ivon that everything would be all right now and he would deal with this disgusting family himself. Laying her on her bed, the young man said that he missed his treasure very much. All these 10 years she had lived in his soul. When the guy learned that a fire had taken the lives of her relatives and she herself had disappeared, it was as if his heart had stopped. It's been a long time, but he's happy that he managed to find her. A subordinate entered the room and asked the emperor what he was doing there, as everyone was busy looking for him for a long time. Theodore's expression changed dramatically, and he hissed for the young man to keep his voice down. The guy didn't understand who this guy who was lying on the bed like this was, but judging from his clothes, he was just a student. Then said that Lady Katrina had already waited for him, and he shouldn't linger again. Theodore replied that none of that mattered now because he had found Ivon. When a subordinate exclaimed that was it really the same Tiisha, Stump said he had better keep quiet, for she was under a dead man's curse. If you said her name aloud, you could say goodbye to your life. The young man replied that he knew it, that the Ferdinand family was involved in the downfall of her dynasty. Theodore said that he believed that Empress Margaret and Rudolf Ferdinand had conspired against Tyrant, but that something was amiss. Why, then they were dead, and the strange thing was that Rudolph's curse did not disappear after his death. Then he ordered Lyndon to find out more about Eve Rovlin. Meanwhile, our heroine had a dream in which all her relatives were alive. She was also found by Theodore, who said that he missed her very much. Opening her eyes, the girl did not realize what kind of strange dream it was, how she ended up in her room and on top of that managed to still fall asleep. It was very interesting how long she had been there. Had she dreamed about meeting Theodore too? But when she remembered the way he had kissed her hand, she was convinced that it had not been a dream. Eve ran to find him, wondering where he had gone. But on the way she ran into Benjamin, who asked where she had been, since he had been looking for her for so long. Our heroine apologized and said that she had an urgent matter, but the young man replied that now is not up to it. She needs, as soon as possible, to hide. Just let her listen to him and do not ask unnecessary questions. The girl exclaimed that she needed some time to check something. The boy shouted after her not to go that way, but it was too late. She saw a picture of everyone kneeling in front of Theodore, and she didn't understand what was going on. Benjamin said that the man in front of her was the young Tyrant of Albrecht. The girl noted that he was still called that now. She thought it was all just a silly rumor, just like 10 years ago. Then he turned his attention to her and said she was just in time, for he was just about to set out to find her. Theodore asked if Sir Rovlin would like to go along with him. After all, he would like to accept him into his personal guard. He definitely has talent, so the Emperor is confident that the young man will be able to protect him. Benjamin stood up in front of our heroine, apologized, and said that his proposal was inappropriate. The young man wryly said that, well, the new patriarch of the family, Ferdinand himself, appeared before him. The boy bowed and greeted the lord of the Albrecht Empire. He was honored, but nevertheless Eve Rovlin belonged to the Ferdinand family, so he could not let him go with him. The young man replied that after all, he is only a knight's apprentice, so he doesn't see any problem. Besides, Sir Yves had already given his consent. When Benjamin asked if it was true, our heroine shook her head negatively. The patriarch said that His Majesty's jokes are completely unnecessary at the moment. Theodore said that in that case, he would simply order him to go along with him. He would have no other choice. The boy responded to that by saying that it was impossible. As the patriarch of the family, he forbids Eve from leaving the estate. His Majesty said that in that case, let him just name his price. Unexpectedly, Katrina appeared and greeted His Majesty and introduced herself, adding that she was extremely happy to meet him. After which, she stated that he should address her on the matter. The young man said that this conversation did not concern her at all, but the girl replied that it was just the opposite. Mr. Rudolph had once given her this boy, so his price should be discussed with her. Theodore smirked and said, okay, they can talk about it. The girl replied that was fine and started talking about how she wanted to become an empress. But suddenly the young man abruptly drew his sword and wounded the insolent maiden. After that, he leaned over to her and told Catherine that the payment for Eve would be her life, although of course it is an underestimated price. The maiden realized that this man could really kill her, so she began to beg for mercy. Then she gave him the bill of sale and said that she was giving him the boy for nothing. The girl wondered if she had always carried it with her. Our heroine thought about what will happen to her now, because from now on she belongs to Theodore. When the young man tore the bill of sale into small pieces, Eve noted that her cage finally opened. There were no more obstacles. The young man said he had no intention of making her a slave. Then he asked again if Sir Rovlin would go with him. Suddenly, Benjamin's voice was heard, who began to ask her not to go anywhere. Our heroine apologized to him and said that she wanted to go with him, after which she thanked him for everything he had done for her. That very day, she said goodbye to her only friend in this hellish place. A while later, Theodore said he was glad she had chosen him. Otherwise, he would have had to lead her into custody. The girl exclaimed that she didn't think Mr. Emperor would be walking alone, and she had absolutely no intention of hurting him there in the park. The Emperor pressed her against him and told her that he had loved her since their first meeting. Could he call her by her first name? 10 years ago, she had a different name and status. It was so strange to see how much he had grown, but his scent was still the same. To her, it seemed as if she was back in those joyous, carefree days. The maids wailed around Katrina, asking for a doctor to be called immediately. Meanwhile, Benjamin was going over in his head everything Eve had said, namely, that she wanted to go with the Emperor and thank him for everything. After which he hissed that he would tear him to pieces. On the way, the young man asked the girl if she was comfortable, if everything was all right. She replied that she was, of course, and thanked him for his concern. The guy did not understand why she was nervous. After all, everything was fine. Our heroine thought to herself that how it is possible not to be nervous here. And in general, whether it is possible to go with him in one carriage, since she is not even a full-fledged knight. Theodore said with sadness in his voice that was she really afraid of him. But he had no other choice. He had to get her out of that place. The girl realized that he seemed to have decided that the situation with Katrina scared her, and said aloud that she was not afraid. Our heroine, on the contrary, felt incredibly light. It's only worth remembering what she had to go through. Removing the Band-Aid from our heroine's face, the guy said that her wound had already healed. Then he added that she shouldn't worry so much. He will protect her. Our heroine objected that she should protect him. The guy asked if she could do him a favor. The girl noted that he was trembling, but Theodore put his head on her shoulder and said that it is very funny, but he is an emperor who is afraid of blood. Our heroine thought to herself that he'd deliberately put up a fight there for her sake. After that, she took his hand and said that she was very glad that she was near him. A while later, they reached the palace, and everything went perfectly. Theodore granted Eve Rovlin the title of his personal bodyguard. Her promotion had to be postponed several times because of her many cases, but she finally became a knight and a member of the Emperor's personal guard. As she put on their uniforms, Eve noted that it had been a long time since her hands had held a real sword. She was worried about relations with her co-workers, but fortunately all was well. They were very pleased with her, but the girl thought they would not accept her into their ranks. Her new peaceful life began. It seemed that the past 10 years were just a terrible dream, but something still troubled her. Theodore asked if she was tired of standing there all day. Our heroine answered that she wasn't. But the guy said it wouldn't do. Then he sat her down at the table and told her to eat sweets. Our heroine objected that she should be guarding him, not having tea. The Emperor replied that it was all right. She could do it sitting down. His other guards don't have to work too hard either. After which he asked the secretary if he was correct. The young man immediately began to agree with every word he said. The girl thought that means she doesn't have to stand after all, but it's all kind of strange. If Theo is so friendly, then why is everyone else afraid of him? With the servants and other people in the palace, he was always nice, polite, and concerned about the knights. The young man told his subordinates that he was pleasantly surprised by their work, and would like to give them a reward, or maybe they would prefer a very long vacation. The pastry chef said that the desserts are wonderful. They are amazing craftsmanship. If he wants, he can try a piece. To the knights, he told them that from this day forward, only Eve remains in his personal guard, and everyone else can go home early. Let them not worry, he doesn't doubt his skills. However, it seems to be very hard to be an emperor. Theodore is still the same, but something was wrong. After wiping the cream off her face, the young man gobbled it up and said that she had gotten a little dirty. After this picture, all the servants scattered, saying they needed to step away for a moment. Our heroine noted that it was very awkward, but finally there was silence. Then the emperor lay on the girl's lap and said that he wanted to rest a little as too much work. But something had been bothering her lately. She didn't understand how she should react to Theodore's behavior. A while later, Eve asked him if it was time for him to get up, since he had so much work to do. She didn't know whether to leave him or let him lie there. He was like a little child. Then the girl asked if he treated everyone like that. Abruptly jumping up, the young man asked if she didn't like it. Our heroine immediately replied that she didn't mean it. Theodore replied that he behaves this way only with her. Everyone else is afraid of him, but next to Eve he can relax. Our heroine felt that his hands were trembling again and told him not to worry because she will always be next to him. The young man abruptly flopped her on her back and asked her what she was thinking about. Eve, stammering with surprise, replied that she was thinking of nothing. The young man replied that he was very sad to hear this, for he had hoped she was thinking of him. Personally, in his thoughts, there is only her. She is the most beautiful person he has ever met in his life. The girl thought to herself that her heart was about to burst. Out loud, she asked him what he was saying. She wasn't beautiful at all. On top of that, she looks like a guy. Taking her hand, the Emperor said he didn't care. Eve thought to herself that she hadn't counted on him being attracted to the image of a man. Then the young man began to lean closer and closer to her in order to kiss her. But the girl pulled out of his arms, apologized, and said she needed to step away for a while. Leaving the room, the girl tried to calm down, for her heart was pounding very fast. The other knights appeared in the hallway and asked if he was all right. Why he was so red, maybe something had happened. Our heroine replied that everything was fine. The young man clarified whether the Emperor was not snapping at her. She can trust them. Mr. Emperor likes to pester his subordinates. The girl exclaimed that he was not that kind of person and let them stop saying such things about him, then said that she urgently needed some fresh air and went outside. She was in this palace again, just like 10 years ago, and it was the same summer night. Next to Theodore, she couldn't stop thinking about her childhood. The girl thought that her strange feelings were caused by what had happened between them then, but no matter how much she tried, she couldn't quiet her heartbeat. Eve had fallen in love with Theo, but then told herself that now was not the time for that. She had things left to do, for she had a duty to find out what had happened to her family and to wash the shame off the name of the Tiisha family. But Eve couldn't get herself under control. Hearing some crunching and noise, the girl immediately grabbed her sword and asked who was there. It was Ernest, who apologized and said he didn't mean to scare her. The girl remembered him telling her he could protect her and take her away. It was foolish to believe his promises. When the young man wanted to say her name, our heroine threw a sword in his direction and told him not to even think of doing it, or if he said her real name, "We'll die." The guy began to cry and apologize for not being able to keep his promise. Our heroine noted that he still roars on, any occasion, but that Ivon no longer exists. Her name is now Eve Rovlin. Choking on tears, Ernest apologized to her again, and when he calmed down, he told her what had happened. All his attempts to meet her were unsuccessful. The Empress Margaret and Rudolph Ferdinand would not give him a single chance. He was going to come on the pretext of an engagement to Katrina, and she knows the rest as it is. When Ernest lost his mother, who had been a pillar of support for him, Crown Prince Theodore became emperor. Though the young man had no intention of claiming the throne, Theodore watched his every move. At the girl's words of apology, she replied that everything was already in the past. In general, it was surprising that he recognized her, because she had changed a lot. The guy exclaimed that he could not otherwise because they had spent a lot of time together. Suddenly, the Emperor appeared and said that now it was clear where she had gone. Actually, it's all rather impolite, and you shouldn't have fun with other men in the service. Then His Majesty grabbed her hand and dragged her behind him. The boy said that it was not what it looked like from the outside, but he didn't listen to them. Theodore squeezed her hand so tightly that it hurt. Then he asked what she was doing there with Ernest. They looked very nice together. Our heroine thought to herself that it wasn't a slap or a boiling pot of water thrown in her face, but why did everything inside her feel so tight? The girl apologized for leaving her post, but decided to clarify why he was so angry with her. The Emperor exclaimed that did she not realize that he did not want to see the person he loved with another man. Crying, the girl thought that he had not realized that she was the same Ivon and had fallen in love with Eve. Although he was upset, he was still kind to her. After hugging her tightly and holding her close to him, the young man apologized and said that he didn't mean to hurt her. Our heroine became convinced that she really loves him, and all these feelings do not seem to her. The guy asked if she had any feelings for him. The girl answered that yes, she loves him. Then they finally kissed, and the young man carried her to his bed. There the Emperor told her not to worry. He immediately realized who she was. Did the girl think he would not recognize his Ivon? Then he said that he loved Ivon Ternesius. The girl screamed and tried to warn him not to say her real name completely, but it was too late. There are some things she can't forget. For example, the first time her mom gave her sweets. Also the day she found a new family that chased away all the sadness inside her. And the declaration of love from Theo. It turned out that after Theodore said her name, nothing happened to him, and he said that because he talked about being able to protect her. Ferdinand's curse was broken, so now they can be together. The next day, our heroine woke up in some huge room and did not realize where she was. Immediately, Theodore appeared, who stated that she woke up and explained that it was his room. The young man asked if she was okay because he seemed to have overdone it a bit yesterday. The girl exclaimed what he was even talking about. The guy replied that let her not worry, nothing like that happened. Our heroine remembered that yesterday Theo said her real name, but why didn't he get hurt? The guy noted that it seems that she had a lot of questions, so everything will now explain to her. If only the girl knew how much he longed for her all these 10 years that they did not see each other. Our heroine asked when he realized that she was exactly Ivon. Theodore replied that as soon as he saw her, it's hard to forget the person you love. Our heroine asked why he hadn't told her that right away. The emperor explained that she was ready to run away at the same second, so he decided to delay for a while. But it was very difficult for him to hold back when the girl was burning him with her gaze. Then our heroine asked how he managed to break the curse. The young man replied that by holy power. Rio Brandt's holy power can heal anything. It didn't matter if it was a wound or a curse, for he had healed her scar on her wrist. Looking at her hands, our heroine noted that there really wasn't a trace of it left. The guy really wanted to do it when they met, so he practiced diligently. He did not give in to rumors of her death. The girl was very happy and could not believe that they were together again. She had been presumed dead for 10 years, but he still found her and said thank you to His Majesty. The boy asked why the officiousness. Ivon explained that she was just used to it by now and didn't want to misspeak in front of other people. The emperor said that it was not worth paying attention to everyone else and let her just call him by his name, Theo, especially since it's just the two of them right now. The girl replied that it was fine and they kissed. Meanwhile, Benjamin could not calm down and said that he would not leave it all for nothing. Lately, everyone in the palace had been whispering about the affair between the emperor and the new knight. From an unknown family, just a knight's apprentice and a low-ranking representative, but she instantly took a place in the emperor's personal guard. Someone had even seen them leaving His Majesty's bedroom together. But on the other hand, the young man didn't care about His Majesty's personal interests. The most important thing for him was that he was not receiving daily death threats. What did he care about that night when he could work in peace? Guy knocked on Theodore's door and said that he had prepared all the necessary materials for him, but caught the picture of Eve sitting in Theodore's arms and jumped up in surprise. When the subordinate abruptly closed the door, the girl exclaimed that he would now think of them. Theodore said that if he wanted to live, he would keep quiet. And in fact, doesn't she know that rumors about their relationship have been floating around the palace for a long time? Did she not notice anything? The girl replied that she had noticed, of course. All the knights were shocked. They were very surprised that she was a girl. It took a long time to calm them down. Theodore exclaimed that's right, because the charms put on her appearance disappeared along with the curse. They made her look like a guy, but it was all for the best. At least no one would dare molest her. Then snuggled up to her and apologized for being too jealous sometimes. Then she asked him if he was tired because he had a lot of work to do. He said he wasn't, but Ivon thought to herself that he was lying and didn't blush. After all, she woke up more than once in the night and saw him sitting working. He doesn't even get a chance to sleep properly because of the amount of things he has to do. Theodore said that he just doesn't want to waste time. He had lost her for 10 years and he would rather not sleep any more than miss an extra second with her. He then put a beautiful jeweled barrette in her hair and said that he got it from his mother. It was her dowry. After that, he said he was going to restore the honor of her lineage, but he needed some time. After all that, will she marry him? The girl immediately clung to him and replied that of course she would. The young man asked if she would like to grow her hair out. Of course she is beautiful now, but long hair suited her very well. Our heroine replied that it was fine. She thought to herself that she was so incredibly happy that even words cannot describe, but she was a little afraid that all these moments could be just the calm before the storm. Sometime later, the girl met Ernest, who asked her how long she had been waiting for him. Ivon replied that she had just arrived. They saw him often. Secretly from Theo, of course. The young man began to look around and asked where his brother was. The girl replied that there was no need to worry, he was working in his office. Ernest said that he heard that his brother was going to drop all charges against her family. The girl replied that yes, and he is trying very hard to do his best, but it's not all that easy. The point of the case is obvious, but there is no clear evidence and it is not clear from which side to approach. He tries to pretend that everything is normal and just quietly waits on the sidelines. Suddenly the guy said he had something to tell her. He wasn't completely sure, so he kept quiet, but he thinks it might help her. There is a possibility that someone from her family is still alive. Our heroine immediately began to think who it could be, grandfather or Richard. She wanted to find him immediately. Sometime later, Theodore asked what was wrong with her, because she had no face at all. The girl replied that nothing was wrong. She thought to herself that the young man had enough on his plate, so she didn't want to stress him out even more. Then the young man looked at the knights with a sizzling look. The boys immediately exclaimed that they had urgent matters to attend to, so they needed to step back for a while. When they were left alone, the emperor said that let her tell him what happened because he was very worried about her. When the girl told him that someone from her family could have survived, he immediately told her not to worry so much, they will definitely find him. When our heroine wanted to address him, His Majesty. The young man objected that he asked to call him by his name. Then the girl thanked him and said, "Thank you, Theo." The boy held her tightly against him and said that since Rudolph's curse had broken, men looked at her differently. Ivon countered that she hadn't even noticed it. The guy said that she would have to build personal boundaries. The girl resented why he was telling her that. She'd only briefly wondered, and he'd immediately pulled her away from the service. But Theodore said that wasn't what he meant. He thought to himself about the fact that first one, then the other, everyone sees that she is beautiful. Something had to be done about it because it really pissed him off. How dare Benjamin desire her? Recently, a letter came from him saying that he had discovered something strange related to the Ferdinand family. Then he asked for his permission to come to the palace and tell him everything in detail. We need to make sure Ivon is not in any danger. Kissing her firmly, the young man thought to himself that he would never give her up to anyone. Sometime later, our heroine caught a cold, and the emperor asked with concern in his voice how she was feeling. The girl replied that she was already better than before. Theo noted that the fever was still there. The girl asked why he wasn't sick. The guy replied that he didn't know. Maybe it was because she was hugging him so hotly. Then he whispered in her ear that he wanted to see her more often outside when it got warmer. Ivon immediately countered that it was time for him to go, let him get some work done. Covering her with a blanket, the young man asked if she could do it alone. Our heroine replied that of course she could because she was not a child. She thought to herself that he was working endlessly all night long. Finally, the young man said that if she gets worse, then let her drink medicine. He would leave the servants at the door and let her call them if she needed anything. In fact, the girl really did not want him to leave, and she involuntarily grabbed him by his jacket. The young man kissed her on the forehead and said that he would be back soon and let her rest for a while. After which he added that he loved her. Theodore always expresses his love with his actions and his soft voice, and she every time does not have time to answer him in the same way. Noticing that it was snowing outside the window, the girl thought that she also loves Theodore very much, and when he comes back, she will be the first to tell him what she feels, namely that she loves him more than anything else in the world. Meanwhile, the young man was riding off on his horse. His subordinate was saying that the lord was too tired and they had better stop for a rest, but the emperor replied that no, they should hurry up. Suddenly the young man fell off his horse and remained lying on the ground without feelings. When the girl heard about it, she immediately ran to him and told the knights that she had been informed that something had happened to His Majesty. They immediately began to calm her down and said that he was fine, but now it was better not to bother him. In addition, she still looks bad, so let her better rest. But our heroine sharply pushed them away and quickly ran into the room to see how he was. At the sight of him, the girl said that she was very glad that he was in one piece and came home. But Theodore yelled for her to shut up, for his head was about to explode. Tell her to stop staring at him and get the hell away. Our heroine in confusion continued to stare at him silently. The young man exclaimed, "What's the matter? Has she never seen a wounded man? Let her be taken out of sight immediately." The girl did not understand what was going on and why he was acting like that. One of his subordinates came up to her and told her she had better get out of here. Ivon thought about whether it was definitely her Theodore, because he had never behaved like this with her. The emperor told the doctor that his head was unrealistically splitting and to have him bring more medicine. The man said he had never seen him in such a state. His Majesty didn't know what he was talking about. When the young man saw snow outside the window, he asked why it was coming in the middle of summer. Outside the door, a servant explained that Theodore had lost his memory and had forgotten the last 6 months, from the time of the visit to the Ferdinands until today. The girl realized that all memories of her had been erased from the young man's mind. His Majesty did not believe that he had fallen from his horse and claimed that someone had knocked him down. It was only in the blinding sunlight that he tried to make out the face he missed so much. He thought he saw him. The servant told our heroine not to despair, for in truth he had always been like this. He also had one request: let her not leave him. The girl became the only person he let near him. Ever since she had reappeared in his life, he had softened, and no one had ever seen him like this. But now His Majesty had suddenly declared that he wanted another bodyguard. Let her be careful if he decided to kick her out, because the case could end up with much more serious injuries. Our heroine couldn't believe that he had really forgotten her and remembered him saying that he loved her. She decided that she would not leave it like that and should try to do something to bring back his memory. The next day, she went into the Emperor's office and told him that Eve Rovlin had returned to duty after her illness. The young man hissed that because he had asked her to find him another bodyguard. The servant said that it was not such a simple matter. Theodore on this said that let him try to finish it quickly. Our heroine noted that he really does not recognize her, but it's okay. Forgotten things can be remembered. The girl has always been the one he loved, and she will prove how much she loves him. When Theo came close to her, the girl began to remember the servant's words that she needed to be careful, because the Emperor might decide to chase her away. Suddenly the young man stroked her head and said that in that case let her stay, but how dare she barge in on him like that? Then threw her out of the office and told her to go take off her uniform and come back afterward. In her interest to do this as soon as possible, otherwise she will not be able to enter anywhere else. Crying, our heroine noted that although he spoke so harshly but remained as soft, everything will be fine and she can survive it. The next day a servant informed her that the Emperor had a new escort. Let her not worry so much and take it as a vacation. Meanwhile, Theodore launched his sword at one of his knights and almost hit him. The servant noted that the new bodyguard didn't even last half a day. Theodore had already started yelling for this garbage to be removed from his sight immediately. The subordinate asked if he was sure he needed a new escort. The Emperor didn't like this question, and he interrogated what the young man had just said. The young man explained that Eve was the best bodyguard. She is young, hard-working, and also very responsible. He was the one who personally saw the talent in her and brought her to the palace. The young man asked if it was really him who had brought her. The servant said yes. 6 months ago he went to Ferdinand's house and took her from there. His Majesty then asked where Lyndon was at the moment. The subordinate replied that a few weeks ago he had secretly assigned him some task, but its contents were secret, so he was not aware of it. The young man noted that if it was Ferdinand, the last traces of Ivon were there. He remembers how, under the pretext of negotiating a marriage, he and Lyndon had searched for Ivon and could remember nothing else. He then decided that it was necessary, as soon as possible, to write a letter to Ferdinand to visit the imperial palace. It has been a week since Theodore lost his memory. Having recovered, our heroine returned to work safely, and a lot has happened in the meantime. She had been told that the nights couldn't even last half a day, but she understood why that was the case because he immediately frowned and scolded if anyone nearby sighed or distracted him. After he got tired of verbally abusing Ivon, he decided to just pretend not to notice her at all. But our heroine was sure that in time everything will get better because their love still hasn't gone anywhere and it can't be the end. Only she does not know how to bring back his memories of the last 6 months. Our heroine decided to try, took his hand, and said that she really needed to talk to him, and could he spare her a minute because it's very important. The young man noted that she is a strange woman and does not give up after such an attitude, and after all, it is enough just to shake off her little hands, and she will immediately get off. But why is Eve so stubborn? Then said that he was sure that her words would not make any sense, but let her try not to disappoint him. Our heroine wondered if he would believe her if she told him the truth and that she was the person he was looking for. Will he become good Theodore again? After gathering her thoughts, the girl decided to try her luck and told him that she was Ivon Tiisha. He actually knew the reason why this woman seemed so familiar to him. It was obvious to the point that at first she could actually be confused with her, for they looked insanely alike. However, he didn't feel the sacred power he had given her, and it was all just a misconception. Suddenly the boy fell to the floor, holding his head. Ivon worriedly started to ask what was wrong with him. The Emperor thought that this woman was a fake and could not be doubted because of this similarity. He didn't remember when it started, but back in his childhood, in one of those endless moments when he sensed danger, Theodore realized that he had manifested the power of Riobrant. If the young man's mother's family found out about it, everyone would be very upset. The boy was born a concubine. His mother was accepted into the imperial family for political reasons. She appeared in the palace and became the empress. But now there was absolutely no one left on either his mother's side or his side, for a second prince had appeared. From that very moment, a series of his meaningless days began. He was tired of just killing everyone. That's when he met Ivon Tyrant. He learned for the first time in his life what greed was and wanted to make her only his. The boy wanted to protect her and love her all his life. She became the reason he lived, and it seemed to him that for her sake, Theo could do anything and even go to the end of the world. One day he told the Empress that he would take the throne for himself, and there was nothing she could do about it. However, he never thought that they would dare to touch the Tyrant dynasty. He really hoped that at least Ivon was still alive. Toward her, who had been so hurt by his greed, it might have been cruel, but he hoped that she just at least stayed alive. The power he put into her wrist wound was his only hope. He thought that if Ivon was alive, they would surely meet again. For the sake of that, he had to get rid of anything that might pose a threat, so that the same mistake wouldn't happen again. He'd come this far for his love, but who was she? His head was splitting madly, and he couldn't put the whole picture together. When he opened his eyes, he saw a concerned girl who was yelling out what was happening to His Majesty. Just looking at her made his heart start to beat more frequently. Was it all just because of her face? Ivon exclaimed that thank God he was awake, because she was so worried. Taking her face, the young man said not to be confused by these facial features that looked so much like Ivon. But suddenly he grabbed her wrist and noted that there was no scar on it, which meant this woman was not the one he was looking for after all. He started screaming that the girl was a vile fake and let her not even touch him. He will never forgive her for daring to mock him. She won't get away with this crime so easily. The next day, Theodore was drinking tea and said that his scent was just beautiful today, or maybe it was because he had such a beautiful girl by his side. She replied that she was honored to spend time with His Majesty. As she watched this, our heroine thought back to the previous night when that horrible conversation took place. She screamed and said that it was her and why Theo did not recognize her. After all, he had promised that he would love her forever. The young man's head was splitting wildly, and he couldn't believe that she was the woman he was looking for. At the screams, a doctor came running into the bedroom to give His Majesty the help he needed. A while later, he asked Ivon if she was trying to bring back his memories. The girl was about to answer him, but the doctor interrupted her. He said that he didn't know what it was about, but every time Theodore tries to recover lost memories, he gets wild headaches, and in severe cases, he even has seizures. It's rather difficult for him to explain this medically, as he has never seen or heard of such cases where memories have been completely erased in just the last 6 months. She is the only close person who has appeared in Theodore's life in the last 6 months. That's why the girl is causing him to have a particularly violent reaction. In other words, if she doesn't disturb His Majesty's memories, he will be fine. Our heroine was angry and said to herself that he was lying because he cannot be so stupid to forget the woman he loved. Ivon never thought she would have to watch her lover flirt with another woman. Theodore said that she had beautiful eyes like a lake, and without realizing it, he had become enchanted by them. The girl could not listen to this and finally could not stand it and ran away. The young man almost every day invited new young ladies to the imperial palace. Now it seemed to Ivon that his attention to her was nothing special at all. He was just good at saying words like, "You are beautiful, I love you," and any other embarrassing phrases. Suddenly Ernest appeared and asked why the girl was crying, then showed that it was necessary to speak quietly because he had sneaked in there secretly, and if he got caught, there would be big trouble. He noted that the atmosphere in the palace had suddenly improved as of late, but now everything seemed to be back to the way it was before her appearance. Ivon abruptly sat down on the ground and began to cry bitterly. The young man worriedly asked what was wrong with her and what had upset her so much. Then he hugged Ivon tightly and added that when she was sad, there was no need to hide her tears. If she didn't mind, he would stay by her side. After all, they were friends. After the girl told her everything, Ernest finally realized what was happening and said that he was even a little calmer now because if the old Theo had seen them a minute ago, he would have been gone. The girl smiled involuntarily and said that it was true because he was very jealous. She had once asked him why he was so angry when they were together with Ernest. Theodore replied that he did not like it when the two of them were alone together. The girl exclaimed in surprise that he was like a little brother to her. Does he suspect them of something? The boy replied that he was not suspicious, but jealous. He is a very jealous man, so she should be careful. If his memory comes back to him, will he regret what he did to her? But no matter how much the guy apologizes, she will never forgive him so easily. But still, he is the man she loves, and it seems the girl can forgive him everything. So let him remember everything as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the emperor was watching their conversation from the window, and he did not like it very much. When the girl said that it seemed like she had to go, the young man angrily hissed that she should leave. Ever since he lost his memory, he has been looking with his eyes for one person and this girl named Eve, whose face looked so much like Ivon. Looking at her, the young man still convinced himself that this woman could not be Ivon. But the young man didn't understand why he couldn't get rid of her so easily. It is necessary to take himself in hand, because this trembling in the chest was because of some fake. All these doubts were because of her, because this girl loved him, not knowing what kind of man he was. That's why he decided to show her his inner world in order for her to realize what he was really like. Our heroine thought to herself that until recently he was so busy that he just ignored her. But for some reason, then today drills her with a look, as if he wants to kill. She had thought she knew Theodore well, but now he seemed a total stranger to her. When the servant entered the room, he announced that the guests had arrived, and he would show them into the parlor. Ivon wondered if the young man had invited a woman again. Looking after him, our heroine wondered why he was doing that. It turned out that it was Benjamin Ferdinand who arrived at the palace and greeted the head of Albright. Ivon was very happy to see him, because this young man helped her a lot in his time. But next came Catherine Ferdinand, who also greeted the emperor and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Our heroine did not understand what they had come to the imperial palace for. The girl said that she had a request to him, but since it was very personal, let His Majesty remove outsiders. The maiden objected that this was impossible, for, as a knight's aide, she could not leave His Highness alone. The young man put his hand on her shoulder and told her to do as she was told. Instructions were then handed out that a few people should be left in the corridor and let the rest guard the palace and control the area. Our heroine was only wondering what they were going to talk about. Suddenly Benjamin embraced her and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Then he added that it must be hard for her to be a knight's aide and that her hair had grown back a lot. Ivon replied that she looked a little strange now. The young man replied that no, it suited her very well. The girl felt awkward for some reason, but maybe it was because they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Benjamin was like someone else. The young man said he wanted to tell her something when they met, but Eve didn't seem to hear him, because she only cared about what was going on behind the closed door. Over a cup of tea, Katrina said that she had heard that he had had an accident. She then asked if he was all right. The emperor replied that there was no need for these formalities. Let him get down to business. Then she said that she had heard rumors that lately His Majesty has been inviting ladies to his palace. People are very curious if he is looking for the future empress. The young man thought to himself that it was all just to torment Eve, and the rumors had already spread. Then he asked her if she wanted to say that she was a candidate for empress. Catherine replied that she would not, although she had great ambitions, but she had recently realized that everything has its time, so she would like to make a different proposal to His Majesty this time. The maiden then said that she wanted to get Ferdinand, let the emperor help her to consolidate power. The young man replied that he had expected her to offer him something grand, but in the end, it was nothing. The girl said that he wanted to get Ivon Tiisha. If he helps her, she will find for him this girl who disappeared 10 years ago. Meanwhile, our heroine asked Benjamin if he happened to know what Katrina wanted to talk to Theodore about. The young man replied that he did not know. Visiting the palace had been his idea, but she suddenly said she would go with him. Ivon was surprised that this girl voluntarily decided to come because she thought that during that incident when Theodore wounded her with his sword, it scared her so much that she would avoid him. Katrina, although arrogant and greedy, she won't make the same mistake twice, and there is definitely a reason for her arrival at the palace. To make up for previous failures, Katrina was adopted to become empress. Receiving a rigorous education, she had worked hard all her life for this goal, so she could not give up so easily. When the girl told the emperor that she would find this missing girl, the young man asked how she knew the name. The maiden replied that she wished she could say it was a secret, but to show His Majesty's trust, she would tell it as it was. She saw it by chance. In Ferdinand's mansion, at the very top of the tower, in the room of the owner of the house, she saw a document that told her. To be frank, the current head of Ferdinand is not trustworthy. Apparently there is some truth he is hiding about Ivon Tiisha. She thought to herself that Ivon is just a woman from a junior family, but who is she that she needs to be hidden like that? Judging from the emperor's reaction, this is all quite exploitable. The young man pointed out that this was Ivon's trace that couldn't be found anywhere before, and then asked if it was possible to steal this document. Catherine said that it was a place that was usually sealed tightly by Ferdinand's magic. Even she had only managed to enter it once. The young man replied that was fine, but as for Ferdinand's head status, he couldn't grant it to her yet. The girl replied that she didn't even hope for that, but if His Majesty would help her a little, she would handle everything herself. The young man then asked if she knew anything about Eve Rovlin. The woman replied that she knew more about her than anyone else. Then she said that the emperor had made her a night assistant, if it was true. The young man replied that it was true. Theodore thought to himself that he didn't know why he had done that before he lost his memory. Katrina replied that it was strange, for such an unassuming student was worthy of being promoted to a position so close to His Majesty. The lad asked what she meant by that. The maiden asked if His Majesty felt an unusual excitement around her. Could it be that Benjamin was using black magic? He had previously treasured this girl especially, but he suddenly sent her to the emperor, so she was puzzled. Theodore wondered if Benjamin Ferdinand really put black magic on this girl and sent her to him. Then Catherine added that even within the Ferdinand clan, there were rumors. After all, the fact that His Majesty keeps a woman of unknown origin with him is very strange. She then stated that she was giving this information to Theodore as a bribe for a future deal. If these judgments turn out to be wrong, she is always ready to pay for it with her head. But if it turns out to be true, His Majesty will have to repay her with his trust. Pulling her to him by the arm, the emperor said that there was no reason to delay, and he accepted her offer. Katerina thought to herself that she would finally take back what was hers and would not let Eve take it away again. A while later, Katerina walked out of the study with Theodore. Benjamin noted that the conversation seemed to have gone well, but asked her to explain what was going on. The young man remembered Katrina's words about using her to keep the nasty bugs from interfering, and he just needed to play along. His Majesty said that the marriage negotiations with the Ferdinand clan would be resumed. Hearing these words, our heroine felt as if the ground began to go away from under her feet. The knights were also puzzled and did not understand why he suddenly decided to resume these negotiations. The young man added that it was necessary to show respect to Miss Katrina Ferdinand from now on. Ivon was unbearably hurt. She didn't understand why things were so unfair. Then she saw the piece of jewelry that Theo had handed her then and asked her to marry her. Clutching it to her, she sobbed and didn't know what to do next. The world seemed to have collapsed. On the way home, Benjamin said that Katrina knows how to make trouble. The girl replied that she was only returning what had always belonged to her. The young man said that it would be better if she stopped deluding herself into thinking that everything was going according to her plans if she didn't want to see blood on her again. The girl noted to herself that no one ever took her side. Why did everyone think she was bad? Trying her best, she finally got what she wanted, but it was just taken away. And this time, Katrina will not make mistakes and will not let it be taken away for anything. Then she said that Mr. Benjamin should be very careful today because he has it all over his face. When the emperor said that the marriage negotiations with the Ferdinand clan would be resumed and that Miss Katrina should be respected from now on, Eve simply ran away, and Benjamin looked after her. The young man was clearly pleased with what had happened, and Katrina said that she would be very busy for a while, because from tomorrow she would be visiting the palace frequently to hurry up the preparations for the wedding. The next day, Theodore showed Catherine a large amount of jewelry and said that if she wants anything, then let her just say. In fact, if she wanted, Theo could offer her the whole of Albrahim. The maiden threw herself on his neck and said that she was very happy that he was so prepared for her. Even when she is just being around His Highness, she feels as if the whole world is at her feet. Theodore replied that she could accept absolutely all the gifts, because she was the kind of woman who deserved it all. Then he ordered the maid to go and pick up Katrina the most exquisite dress. The girl said goodbye and told him that he should wait for her because she would be back soon. When the girl left, the servant asked if His Majesty was really going to marry her. The emperor asked if there were any reasons why he could not do so. The boy replied that there were many. He thought to himself that the nephew of the former empress was supposedly murdered by the current emperor, and they had already broken off their engagement once. But out loud he said that if Theodore was fine with it, then everything should be perfectly fine. The boy replied that it was fine. He thought to himself that he had always lived like this. He mentally turned to Ivon and said that if he could meet her again, he would be ready to wear the mask and please everyone. He is capable of wielding a sword with a smile on his face, so he's fine. But he was still bothered by this woman who was very similar to his lover. Our heroine approached Theodore and said she needed to talk to him. Noticing his mother's jewelry on her hair, the guy asked where she got it from. The girl recalled that when the boyfriend had given it to her, she had hidden the jewelry back in her jewelry box. Theodore asked that she wouldn't wear it. The girl replied that she would, but right now her hair was short and it wouldn't really suit her. Then added that it is a very valuable and important thing, so she only wants to wear it on special days. Our heroine asked in surprise that didn't he remember this gift. After all, he had given it to her personally. The Emperor's head began to split again and his heart beat harder. Was it all because of black magic? Then our heroine added that even if she told him everything now, he would not listen to her. In this letter, she outlined the 6 months of which His Majesty had lost his memories. If he wanted to know about her, then let him read this letter even if he was in pain. The young man did not understand who she was to worry him so much. Suddenly Katrina appeared, who said that they were so gathered and talked about something together. Then she asked if she was disturbing them. Paying attention to the jewelry in the hair of our heroine, the maiden exclaimed that she also wanted such a hairpin and let Theodore give it to her. The young man again began to persuade himself that she was not Ivon and told our heroine to give the hairpin to Miss Katrina. But the girl replied that she did not want it and would not give it back for anything. The young man immediately grabbed a sword and cut the hairpin off our heroine's head along with her hair. After that, he said that she had nowhere else to pin it, so she didn't need the jewelry anymore. Our heroine thought about the fact that she will never be able to return to those times that were before. The young man, on the other hand, was thinking that he will never again return to those times when he was powerless and could not protect Ivon. Now, there was only one road he would take, and if anyone tried to stop him, he would never forgive them. Ivon remembered how she and Theodore were sitting under the tree and he didn't want to go anywhere, and said that they should sit for a while longer because he wanted to be alone with her. The girl thought that since the young man had gone away from his duties so many times, a lot of work had accumulated, and his assistant had repeatedly asked her to help him get the Emperor to work. The girl exclaimed that okay, he looked a little tired, so he needed to rest before he started working hard. The boy noted that she had said that yesterday and the day before. The young man then said that he hoped winter would come very quickly. Ivon asked why if he was sick of the heat. Theodore replied that it was because she didn't like the heat. The girl replied that it is just very hard to train and you are constantly suffocating, but she likes the summer. After all, it was at this time of year she met the love of her life, and she doesn't really like winter as it's cold during this period, and it's that time of the year when everything most precious is taken away. The young man replied that everything will be fine and all seasons of the year will be the best for his beloved, as he will always be by her side. The man who was born especially for her and who taught her love like a scalding mist is no more. The girl doesn't like winter. Winter is cold, and this season takes everything dearest to her. This time, it was cruel cold winter again. When they entered the palace, the young man told Katrina to leave at the same moment. The girl asked why her fiancé had become very cold to her again. Theodore asked that wasn't at all originally just a deal, or maybe she wants affection from him. The girl asked that if he really wouldn't give her that hairpin. People would find that strange, after all. He pointed his sword at a knight close to him for his bride's sake, but he still didn't give her the jewelry. I really wonder what would happen if people found out about it. The young man asked sharply, wondering if she had lost her mind. This was their deal. Shouldn't he play the role of the fake fiancé? If she tried to jump in over her head one more time, he wasn't responsible for himself. Catherine wondered if he had behaved the same way with Eve. Even though he was kissing her, he was representing her. Did he really think the girl hadn't guessed that? The young man finally realized that he loved Eve, but it was in the past, and she also can't forget her past feelings. Catherine added that let His Majesty not forget the purpose of their deal. She is looking for traces of Ivon Tiisha, and even sacrificing her money for that, and Eve is an evil woman planted by Benjamin. The young man countered that he had yet to find proof that black magic had been used. Katrina thought to herself that she couldn't believe that he kept saying such things. If it continued like this, their plan would come to an end. She said out loud that he gets angry when this girl is around him, then exclaimed that she had a great idea if he wanted to leave Eve to her. The next day, the young man informed our heroine that from this moment, she must accompany Lady Katrina in his stead. The girl objected that this was impossible because she was His Majesty's bodyguard. The young man began to get angry and said that did she really want him to raise his sword for her to obey his order. Meanwhile, Katrina was thinking about proving to the Emperor that our heroine was using black magic. The girl exclaimed that such a hairstyle suited Eve very well. She had no doubt that such a haircut would suit her. Long hair was a luxury for a night. After that, she offered her to sit down in order to let her relax a little, because they had not seen each other for so long. Our heroine did not understand what was going on, what she was up to, and why she suddenly decided to appoint her as her bodyguard. Katrina said that she had a lot of questions, and apparently Eve had them too, so they could talk openly with each other. Sitting down at the table, our heroine asked why she had decided to choose her as her escort. Katrina replied that of course it was so that Eve could protect her. After all, everyone knows that it is her first time in the Imperial Palace, and she needs someone she can rely on in an unfamiliar place. She asked His Majesty for it, and he personally gave his permission. Then said that it was her turn to ask questions, and said that since leaving Ferdinand, she has had a lot of success. A simple knight, apprentice has reached the position of a close associate of His Majesty. What did she use to achieve this? Our heroine replied that she did not know what she was talking about. The girl said that everyone was very curious to know why she suddenly revealed that she was a woman after all. Maybe she was using her female body to deceive His Majesty. Our heroine jumped up abruptly and accidentally knocked over the teacup before asking what she meant. Catherine burned her hand with this tea and exclaimed how dare she attack her. Ivon didn't understand why she would yell like that over a small burn. What kind of dramatic scene was this? Katrina said that apparently she still didn't understand the whole situation. Theo had given her complete power over her, and now she was her mistress. Our heroine replied that let her not dare to say Theodore's name with her filthy mouth. The girl replied caustically that did she not believe her? Did she think that by staying with Theo, she would not be hurt? But how could it be now that he would never care for her again? No matter how busy he is, if he manages to find time in his busy schedule, he comes to see her every day and whispers tender words in her ear. Does Eve now realize the difference between the two? Whereupon she ordered her maids to seize our heroine. Ivon did not understand what they were going to do. Katrina, holding a kettle of hot tea in her hands, said that if she wanted to blame someone, she should blame Theodore for everything. She thought to herself that she should find something about black magic, because the Emperor had said that it did not matter what method was used. After all this time, Eve's body should remember everything, so now was the time for punishment, and she would teach her a lesson once again. Meanwhile, Ernst overheard the conversation between the two knights who were talking about how the atmosphere in the Imperial Palace, at the moment, was so frightening that it was even scary. Not too long ago, the Lord was acting like he was completely different, and then he abruptly comes back as a tyrant. So they don't know how to talk to him. They have heard that his new bride has recently arrived. Every time they pass her chambers, they hear screaming. It was unclear what she was even doing in her room, and it was scary for what their empire could turn into. The young man grabbed his head from the information he heard and could not believe that Katerina and Theodore were engaged. What is even going on in the Imperial Palace? He can't just sit idly by. Katerina must not become empress. This has to be stopped immediately, and first he has to find Eve to find out what is going on at the moment. After a while, he came across an old acquaintance. Ernest exclaimed that he had finally found her. Noticing that her whole body was covered with scars, he asked who had done it, but our heroine replied that it was all useless, and no matter how much she said, it was all over long ago. Theodore would not come back again. The young man exclaimed for her to leave the palace with him. Guy can't leave her alone there anymore. Meanwhile, Theodore had a nightmare where Ivon was all on fire, saying she was in a lot of pain and begging to be saved. The guy shouted that let her wait for a while, and he would definitely save her, no matter what happened. But suddenly the girl screamed that it was too late. It was all his fault. Why did he provoke Empress Margaret and start the rebellion? It's all because of him. She can't forgive him. It's his fault her whole dynasty is dead. He must save her, but she cannot forgive him. His Majesty woke up in a cold sweat and tears. He had this dream almost every day. It was necessary to get some fresh air and calm down a bit. Theodore convinced himself that Ivon was alive. The next day, his assistant noted that the young man had done a great job, but it seemed that he was about to faint. Then he asked if he slept well at night. Theodore replied why he was doing all this. Doesn't he have anything better to do? The subordinate replied that there was no new information on the investigation so far. Currently, the only survivor is Madame Grancy. She was guarding Riobrandt's house, but now the woman is seriously ill and can't even speak properly. Brian's fourth body, which has not been previously cognizant, and Yvonne's fifth, is reported missing. The young man thought about it all night, but there was no way he could accept the reality that she was gone. He had some sort of strange premonition. The image of Eve kept popping up in his mind, and he didn't understand why he was seeing her. When he thought of Ivon, she immediately appeared, for they were so alike. He wanted to get rid of her, hoping the headache would go away. Then he asked how his former bodyguard was feeling. The servant replied that he hadn't heard from her since she had become Miss Katrina's attendant. The boy thought about the fact that the girl had said she would find evidence of the use of black magic, had she still not found out anything. So exclaimed that he had to meet with Katrina. The subordinate asked if he should send her a letter, but the young man said no. He was her fiancé after all and wanted to please her with a surprise appearance. Meanwhile, Katrina drank tea and remarked that here was the real taste of life. All these jewelry and dresses and the place of empress belonged only to her. This Eve is still alive, but it will just gradually destroy her will. The girl hopes that now Rovelyn has realized what she will get for deciding to encroach on what belongs to her. Unexpectedly, the maid asked if this was all normal at all. She was, after all, the Emperor's personal attendant. Katrina replied that there was no need to worry. If Theodore was worried about her, he would have come here right away. So the Emperor doesn't care if anything happens to her. In Ferdinand's room, she found documents proving her connection to black magic. She didn't realize it right away, but they contained information that Eve and Benjamin were in cahoots. This was a clear indication that they wanted to use black magic on Theodore. Katerina then thought that now her life would change abruptly, because it was very interesting what would happen to the one who dared to seduce the Emperor with black magic. Although she mocked her, but the girl did not reveal any information about black magic. Therefore, she would have to try a little harder to gain the Emperor's trust. After that, she said that even if Theodore found out, she wouldn't even blink an eye if Eve turned to mush. Suddenly, the Emperor's voice rang out and asked what it all meant. Let Katrina Ferdinand explain to him in detail all the words she'd just said. When Theodore stood by Eve's bedside after a while, a voice suddenly sounded asking not to wake her, for she had just fallen asleep. It was Ernest, and His Majesty asked why and how the young man was there.